coming up on Monday. That's what those fireworks are going to be about later tonight, in case you didn't know. And it just caused me to reflect a little bit on the threats to freedom that we face in the United States. Because freedom is so under attack right now in so many different ways, and I wanted to discuss with you a few of those attacks and how to counter them, and perhaps also related to your situation here. The impetus for improving public schools in this country began in earnest in the late 50s and the early 60s, when there was really an effort made throughout the country to talk about the inadequate amounts of money that were being spent on public education. And frankly, the teachers' union at the time, the National Education Association, was very good about that. They published something called the rankings of the states that indicated how much each state was spending. And I know because when I worked for Bill Clinton in Arkansas, Arkansas was always 49th on the list. And it became a slogan around the state, "Thank God for Mississippi." And as a result of that, at the end of the 60s and through the 70s, the amount that we spent on education began to increase. But there was no commensurate improvement in the education system. So in the early 80s and through the 90s, spearheaded by a number of aggressive governors, including Bill Clinton and including, used to like her back then, Hillary Clinton, and George Bush in Texas, there was a strong move to reform schools, to require more courses, upgrade the curriculum, shrink class sizes, expand the school day, expand the school year, do all kinds of stuff that really would work on trying to improve public education. And those programs passed in a great many states. And they too accomplished almost nothing. There was almost no advance or improvement in education as a result of that whole range of initiatives. So then a new approach was started in the late 90s and the early years of this last decade, which was to measure student performance objectively by national testing, to show the lack of progress and to target those schools and those individuals that were having specific problems. And that was embodied in some of the testing reforms that President Clinton advocated in his second term, and that President Bush passed with the No Child Left Behind Act. And it was successful in that everybody in the country, all kids, took tests at the 4th grade and the 8th grade and other years, and there were accurate measurements of their progress from year to year. And you know what we found? Even though we had increased in real dollar terms the amount we spend per student from $7,500 in 1990 to $10,000 in 2010, there was no increase in reading scores. Zero, zilch, nada, none. And in math scores, they soared upward by 0.4% over 20 years. You had to pass the test to be able to measure how much it rose. Staring you directly in the face is that nothing that we have tried in the realm of education reform has worked. Nothing. And we are now with our backs to the wall. This is our last chance, really, to save the public education system in the United States. And a consensus has developed over what changes are necessary. The first change is to eliminate teacher tenure, so that teachers have to earn their keeping the job, just like all of us do. Teacher tenure was never intended as a job security vehicle. It was intended as a function of academic freedom at the collegiate level. But what do you need academic freedom for when you're teaching 2nd grade arithmetic? It's kind of the same, you know? And teacher tenure has become the excuse for keeping bad teachers on the job. We have a situation in New York City that is absolutely amazing. There are 4,000 teachers in New York City who are so bad, so senile, so crazy, so physically or sexually or verbally abusive, that the chancellor of the New York City school system has decided they cannot be exposed to children. And he can't fire them because of the union contract. He has been able to fire 2 teachers over 10 years of the 80,000 teachers in New York school system for cause. 2, not 200, 2,000, but 2. So he's got these teachers who he can't expose to kids and he can't fire. There are 4,000 of them in the New York City school system. And every day, those 4,000 teachers report to what are called rubber rooms, where they sit in a room and watch TV and read the paper and read books and are not permitted to be exposed to students. We can't fire them. They're paid full wages, full benefits, and when they retire, full pensions. And when New York City had to lay off 4,000 teachers this year because of the budget shortfall, the mayor of New York City, Bloomberg, went to the state government and went to the unions and begged them to be able to fire these 4,000 teachers instead of the 4,000 last hired teachers, many of whom were from Harvard and Yale and Princeton under the teacher programs there, and with the young, idealistic, hardworking kids. And the union and the legislature said no. So all of the new teachers who've been hired in the last 3 years were fired. And those 4,000 teachers remain in rubber rooms every single day. That's what teacher tenure means in the United States. And the other big impetus was the other half of that, which is rather than pay teachers based on seniority or on advanced degrees, pay them based on merit. Pay them based on student performance. Test their classes in September, test their classes in June, and pay them up or down based on the variation in outcomes. The teachers union in New York State got the state legislature to pass a law saying it shall be illegal to pay teachers based on test scores of their students. But now, thankfully, on the one good thing Obama's done, the race to the top, that's been overcome, and now merit pay is making its inroads into even the bluest of states. But that concept, which is to pay the good, young, enthusiastic teacher 80, 90, 100,000 a year, and not to pay based on seniority or on advanced degrees, but based on merit. To understand that teaching is the most important profession that there is in our society. That's a fundamental education reform that we need. And if there are layoffs, that they be able to be done based on merit, not based on the last hired, first fired. And if none of this works, if none of this is effective, if all of this is ineffectual, as the changes we've done over the last 40 years, there's one final step, which is to give parents the right to vote with their feet and send their children to the school that will best educate their children. The leader of the school choice movement in Washington, D.C. is an African-American woman. And I asked her, why are you so involved in this? And she said, I was one of the 7 girls who originally integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. And they had to call out the 82nd Airborne Division with bayonets affixed to escort us into school. And she said, and I've campaigned for civil rights in education ever since that day. And this is the new civil rights issue in education. In Orlando the other day, I was heckled and picketed by teachers. And one of them yelled out at me, which of our schools are you going to close? And I yelled back, the empty ones. So those are the stakes in Senate Bill 5. That's what this fight is all about. It is not about some abstraction about what rights workers have and what rights management has and all of that. It's about whether our schools are going to be run by parents and taxpayers and professional educators and administrators or by the union contract. competition works at all in Ohio. It's about whether you can make the schools a place to educate your children. Why are our public high schools so bad, and yet our colleges are so good, that of the 20 top universities in the world, ranked by Economist magazine, 17 of them are in the United States, and 12 of them are public colleges? Why did we suddenly become really good at colleges and not high school? The reason is school choice. That that Notre Dame has to compete with Duke and with the University of Alabama for students. There's no such thing as automatically going to the school that's assigned to you. And the result is that academic standards at colleges have soared, and they're doing a very good job in the United States. We need the same level of commitment, driven by the same choice in Ohio that we have in these other states. Now, behind this lies a deeper philosophical question, which is, what is the point of public services in the United States? Are they for the recipients, or are they for the providers? Is our goal to help our children, or to employ our teachers? Is our goal to deliver services, or to pay state workers? Are these state and local services ultimately just public works projects, where the goal is to give somebody a paycheck and a pension and send them home? Or is it a real serious effort to improve health care and to improve education and to improve public safety by more effective management of public resources? That is the real question before you. Do we determine how our schools are run based on what is good for the teachers or what is good for the students? And within the education community, do we determine it based on what's good for the incompetent teachers or what's good for the good teachers? Do we want to tell a young, idealistic young teacher that you will be laid off if there are cuts, you can't get promotions until you're here for a dozen years, you got to go back to school and get a master's and a doctorate if you want to hope to be paid more? It doesn't matter how well you do in the classroom. Or do we want to tell them this is a great career, you can get paid a lot of money, you can control your own destiny, you can make a difference with these kids, and you'll be rewarded for that? That's the message, that's the question we have to ask. You know, 1/3 of the new teachers quit after 2 years, and 1/2 quit after 5 years. And the union represents the others. So what we need to do is to have a system that encourages these young teachers, pays them well, and gives them the kind of creative opportunity that Senate Bill 5 will permit. The union is trying to make Senate Bill 5 about collective bargaining. It's not. It's about who runs Ohio's schools. Now, the second threat to our liberty that I want to address is a little bit related to that. It's what Senator Farber spoke about in the population statistics he gave you, the shrinkage from 21 to 16 seats in Congress, which is the Northeast and the Midwest of the United States are becoming depopulated. Depopulated. And the reason is because of the oppressive tax structure. Of the 7 states that lost congressmen in the last census, every one of them has an income tax. Of the 7 states that gained congressmen, 4 of them have no income tax. And that includes Texas, that picked up 4 seats, and Florida, that picked up 2. Nevada, that picked up 1, Washington State picked up 1. None of them have an income tax. You look at the city of Detroit, its population has dropped from 1 million to 700,000 in the last 10 years. You look at the city of Buffalo, its population has gone from 480,000 to 220,000 over the last 20 years. There was a play on Broadway I loved called The Chorus Line, and it has a line in it where one of the girls says, "Committing suicide in Buffalo is redundant." But what we are looking at is the younger, the most productive, the most upwardly mobile, the most ambitious, the most creative of our young people. Our children are leaving our states because of the policies that are being adopted by the Democratic governors and the Democratic state legislators of those states. If you look at the difference between Pennsylvania and New York, where outstate Pennsylvania is thriving and upstate New York is crashing, it's entirely because of the tax policies of those two states. I have a house in Connecticut where I live part-time, and we are ranked last of the 50 states in job creation over the last 20 years. And those coincidentally are the 20 years in which we first imposed an income tax. So the question really is, will our states survive? Will we live? We have such freedom of movement, such flexibility as to where you live in the United States, that the Democratic liberal politicians are squeezing the people who produce money to death and forcing them to move into other states. New York City has 44,000 people out of 8.5 million who pay 2/3 of the city income tax. How long do you think they're going to stay in New York City? The whole point is that we are not only risking our children's future, we're risking our states and our communities' future by not interrupting this tax and spend cycle, where you raise taxes, you increase benefits, you drive productive wage-earning people out of the state. Because of a smaller tax base, you have to raise the taxes more, you drive more people out of the state, there's less money invested, there are fewer jobs, you have to hike welfare spending, and you have to hike taxes again, till ultimately you have nobody left, which is precisely the situation the once great city of Detroit finds itself in. Will Columbus, Ohio go the same way? No. Those are the stakes. That's what this is all about. And then written nationally, you have an even more compelling statistic. Do you know what percentage of the people in the United States of America pay no federal taxes, except occasionally excise taxes on cigarettes and booze? What percent pay zero taxes? 47.4% pay zero taxes. And the top 20%, which by the way is about $100,000 of household income and up, pay 85% of the taxes. And the top 1%, which is by the way 530,000 household income and up, the top 1% pay 41% of the taxes. So what's happening is there's a small group of people that are paying taxes, a massive group of people that are getting benefits and paying no taxes, and a smaller group of people that are paying some taxes and get some benefit. A democracy can't go on that way. A democracy can't go on where tax increases are irrelevant to half or 2/3 of the population because they don't have to pay them. Now, it was possible in the past for that to happen because nobody was going to move out of the United States. Just like it was possible in the past for that to happen because nobody was going to move out of Ohio. And before that, nobody was going to move out of Detroit to go to the suburbs. But haven't we learned that people vote with their feet when the votes they cast with their fingers don't count? And that is the situation we are facing in the United States. When George Bush was president, Bush 43, he made a fateful and very important decision. Until he came along, when federal tax credits were voted, it meant that you wouldn't have to pay taxes on that amount of money. But if you paid no taxes, you just wouldn't get the benefit. Wouldn't be anything one way or the other for you. Then Ronald Reagan passed the Earned Income Tax Credit. That was really not a tax credit, it was a welfare payment. But it was for people that work. And it said if you go to work and you come home and you're poor, we'll give you a check at the end of the month to bring you up to the poverty level. So if you work full-time, you are by definition never poor. Great program, fabulous program, extended and expanded by President Clinton, has done more to fight poverty and to reduce welfare than anything that's happened. But then George Bush Jr., 43, wanted to pass his tax reductions in 1993. And the Democrats said, this is for the wealthiest 1% of the country. So he put in a child tax credit of $1,000 for each child. And so that he could jigger the math so it would be a program that would really help the bulk of the population, those people who paid no taxes, he made it a refundable tax credit, which meant not a refund, a welfare check. So if you paid no taxes at all, you got $1,000 back from the government on April 15th. And then Obama added on additional tax credits until we replaced welfare with tax credits. There used to be something called welfare. It affected maybe 10 or 12% of the population. They were very poor people. The money we gave them was resented. It created generational cycles of poverty. And under the welfare reform legislation that President Clinton signed, and I broke his arm for him to get him to do it, we eliminated welfare as we know it. We reduced the welfare rolls by half. We reduced child poverty by a third. But what the liberals have now done is they've turned our tax system into a welfare system. So it isn't just the poorest 10 or 12% that are getting it, it's the poorest 47.4% that are getting it. And then another 15 or 20% that get a partial credit, go down to zero, and get a refund for the rest of the amount. 2/3 of America is now on welfare. 50 million get food stamps. Unemployment insurance that used to be for 26 weeks is now a permanent program for almost 2 years, 99 weeks. Barack Obama has put America on the dole. He has made America into a welfare state. And he hopes to get reelected and to perpetuate that with the votes of those who are receiving their welfare checks. Bill Clinton once told me, he is brilliant, that Republicans and Democrats both largely agree on aid to the poor. They disagree about aid to the middle class. The Republicans want to give aid to the poor, and so do the Democrats. But the Democrats want to extend that all the way up into the middle class, because they want the middle class entitlements to be the bodyguard for the poverty entitlements, just like in Social Security. You can't cut Social Security benefits because everybody gets it. You can't really cut Medicare, as we're about to find out, because everybody gets it. And as a result, the middle class won't put up with those cuts because it isn't just the poor who are getting it. And what Obama has done is to vindicate the idea that President Clinton explained to me that day by going ahead and making sure that everybody in this country gets welfare. So we are becoming a system in which on the one side there are the tax eaters, and the other side the taxpayers. On the one side, the consumers of revenue, on the other side, the generators of wealth. And you can't exist like that. You can't have a country like that. Now, why do the Europeans love Barack Obama so much? It's not because he goes around and gives groveling apologies. It all goes back to what happened in 1981 in France. François Mitterrand was elected president, the first socialist in French history. And he immediately nationalized everything he could find in the country. And France fell into a huge depression. All the capital left to Margaret Thatcher's Britain and Ronald Reagan's America. And then the next year they voted for a conservative who repealed and privatized everything that he nationalized, and France went back to being what it is today. Well, they saw that in Europe, and the socialists got together and they said, you know, Lenin was right when he said you cannot have socialism in just one country, because all countries have to have the same rules, otherwise the capital will all move to the countries that have the looser rules and have the ones that make people work harder and more productive and lower taxes. You can't just do it in one country, and that's why he didn't attempt it in Russia. What happened was Stalin came in and he had a solution: shoot everybody who doesn't agree with him. but short of that, you can't have socialism in just one country. So they changed the common market, a trade association, and made it into the European Union, a political and economic entity, and brought Britain in, so that everybody now had the same laws. You couldn't fire anyone without basically going to court. I have a friend who, a couple, and they had a nanny, well, an ex-couple. They had a nanny, and the woman, the nanny, had an affair with the husband. So they fired her. But the French court ruled they couldn't throw her out of their house because the apartment came with the job and would stay after the job was ended. There's a rule in France that says you can only work 35 hours a week. You literally need the permission of your union to work more than 35 hours. Why? Because you're taking somebody else's job. Now what that means is you can't work overtime. You can't say, oh man, I want to buy a new house, I want my kid to go to a good school, I want to work my way up the ladder, I'm going to work 60, 70 hours a week, and I'll come home bleary-eyed, and I'll burn the candle at both ends for 5 or 6 years, and I'm really going to get ahead. You can't do it. They put you in jail for that. They fine you. Because everybody has to have their place in society. They're relegated to where they were born and where their family stayed. They can't move up economically because everybody else is protected against anybody's upward mobility. That's the system that prevails in Europe. And with Britain, it now prevails there because they're in the European Union. But it still didn't work because all the capital fled to the United States. And since 1980, 80% of the new jobs that have been created in the industrialized world outside of China and India have been created in the United States. 10% in Britain and 10% in all of Europe and Japan combined. So now the Europeans are trying to plug that hole and to have the same policies and the same politics happening in the United States that are happening in Europe, so that they can have their lovely socialist paradise with no upward mobility, with lots of vacation time, short hours, work is an unpleasant interlude between vacations. Nobody thinks of being fulfilled by what they do at work. Anyone who creates wealth is a greedy malefactor, and the accompaniment of that is a population decline that threatens to make Europe uninhabited in the next 100 years. Population of Italy is literally going down from 65 million to 50 million over the course of this 50-year period. Russia from 150 million to 100 million. Again, everybody is voting against the system that they have there by literally not having children. So this is the next attack on freedom that's happening. The freedom to have upward mobility, the freedom to rise above your class, the freedom to move from out your class, and the freedom to keep your own money, govern your own life, and make your own decisions. The next threat to freedom is one that is embodied in your constitutional amendment on health care. When you have the advances that are being made in health care today, you inevitably have to ration health care. Inevitably. I mean, heart transplants now are routine. They can be done fairly easily. They used to be highly experimental. And they cost, what, $250,000, $500,000. Are you going to give every single person a heart transplant? Are you going to give everybody an organ transplant? You can't possibly vaguely begin to afford to do it. And right now, we ration our health care based largely on the ability to pay. Because why do I get up in the morning and go to work? It's not so I can buy a yacht or an airplane or a corporate jet. It's so that I can provide for my family. And what is the most important thing I can give my family? Good medical care if they ever need it. And that's why I work. That's why I get out of bed in the morning. And when my wife needs a heart transplant, I am damn determined she's going to get it. And I'll work morning, noon, and night to make the money to make that possible. But what Obama is doing is he is detaching health care from earning power. He is saying that health care should be rationed based on merit, not based on money. But the merit is determined by a federal bureaucracy. The merit is determined by people who have an objective standard, which is basically inhuman. That objective standard says that if you're 85 years old and you need a kidney transplant or you need a hip replacement, you can't get it because you don't work, you're not productive, you probably have a life expectancy of 3 or 4 more years at best anyway, and we're not going to spend public resources on it, and we will not permit you to spend your own money on it, because we are rationing health care delivery in the United States. Now, I am pro-life, but abortion, frankly, isn't the issue that makes it most important to me. But you bet I'm pro-life when it comes to living and breathing human beings. And I'm not going to support any system, or any candidate that will support any system, that permits a government bureaucrat to assume the power that God ought to have to decide who lives and who dies. And that is the essence of Obamacare. Because you cannot possibly cut the cost of Medicare or Medicaid or private health care, or even limit the cost, without making these life or death decisions. And right now, the government is collecting data from every physician in the United States. You know that form you sign where you say, I acknowledge, my doctor acknowledges that the information I'm giving him is confidential? Well, use it for confetti. And in fact, I'm working with the Pacific Justice Institute to bring a suit under HIPAA, the Healthcare Privacy Act, to challenge the legality of this document. To federal and state bureaucrats your entire medical history. What medications you're on, what your blood pressure is, whether you smoke or not, what your body mass index is, what your height is, what your weight is, what surgeries you've had, what illnesses you've had. And that information is going to go, at best, into an aggregated statistical form that will permit them to ration healthcare and to decide what treatments they should allow and not allow. I say at best. At worst, it's going to be the decisive factor in whether you get a job, whether you get into a school, whether you qualify for any of the benefits that people hope to qualify for in life. I mean, if I know that this person is going to get Alzheimer's at some point in the future, am I going to hire him? Can that information be safely put in the hands of every state and federal bureaucrat in the United States? Those are the stakes that we're looking at in Obamacare. And it is horrendous, it's horrific, and it violates the sacred principle of right to life. It's being decided by Americans for America, and is reviewable by Congress and changeable by an act of Congress or by an act of the President. But what is going on now is we have a body called the G20, which includes such wonderful countries as Saudi Arabia and Argentina and Turkey. And these countries are making the economic decisions for the entire world. And a majority of the people represented by these countries are not in democracies. Who does the delegate from China represent? One man. At worst, at best, he represents 10,000 party apparatchiks, but he sure as hell doesn't represent 1.2 billion Chinese. And these decisions are being made by a meritocracy, a bureaucracy that is self-perpetuating, self-anointing, has its own rules and its own agenda, and is seeking to control every aspect of our economic life. They are socialists, not advancing under the mask of ideology anymore, but advancing under the mask of expertise, telling us how we ought to live and how we ought to live our life, and using any excuse they can to decrease our sovereignty and increase their own. You take the issue of global warming and climate change. I don't know whether it's going on or not, and I don't know whether it's man-made or not, but I'll tell you something that I do know. By private enterprise, the United States is ahead of Western Europe in complying with the mandate to reduce our carbon emissions. Ahead of them. We cut our carbon emissions from 6,000 million metric tons a year in 2006 to 5,300 last year. And our goal is to bring them down to 5,000 by 2020. We'll beat that goal by 5 years. And we're doing it by the higher price of gasoline, by the higher price of electricity, by free people making choices in their lives based on being educated and learning the facts, not based on a tax policy and a regulatory policy and an enforcement policy run by government. Make no mistake, these guys are not interested in fighting global warming. They are interested in using global warming to regulate the entire private sector. So those are truly the stakes. You know, when you go to Europe, you talk to Europeans, and they'll tell you when there's a politician giving a speech about education, they say, oh, he's demagoguing the issue to get elected. But when an expert, a bureaucrat, the commissioner of education, elected by nobody speaks, they say, oh, he's an expert, we can listen to him, he's rising above politics. But they're a continent that doesn't believe in democracy. Germany's been in democracy for about 20 minutes. You know, Italy was fascist country until 1945. Russia still isn't a democracy. France really wasn't a democracy until 1958, when the new constitution came in. Britain has a long heritage of democracy, but it's totally outvoted. And the freedom level in the United States, our ability to launch businesses, hire people, fire people, take steps, make investments, speak politically, is light years ahead of that in Europe. Do you know that it is illegal to criticize the president of France? You can go to jail for that. In France. Not talking about Russia, France. Jacques Chirac took a mess of bribes when he was mayor of Paris, and the guy who was his bagman confessed on his deathbed, and it was illegal for the French news media to report it. After Chirac left office, it was widely reported, and he's now being investigated and will likely be indicted. But while he was president of France, you couldn't touch him. In Britain, if I speak ill of the prime minister, I can be sued for libel in a civil court, and the same rules apply to my libeling you as my libeling him. Now, in the United States, that's not true. If I libel you, you're a private citizen, and you can sue me, and if you can prove that what I said is untrue and hurt you, you can collect from me. But if you libel me, I'm a public figure, and I sue you, it's not enough for me to prove that you're wrong. I have to prove that you had a malicious disregard for the truth. That you knew the truth, you knew that it was false, you published it nonetheless because you wanted to get me. An almost impossible standard to prove. So functionally in the US, there is no libel law for public figures. And yet in France and Britain and throughout Europe, you can sue anybody for libel, which means newspapers pull their punches and politicians don't talk out of turn. It literally means that they have such vastly less freedom in those countries than we have here. And they are attempting, with Obama, to bring their system here. And that's the stake we face. Now, I'm going to take questions, but I want to close because today is the 148th anniversary of the beginning of the Battle of Gettysburg that began on July 1st and ended on July 3rd. And we have a tradition in my family that we read the Gettysburg Address every July 4th because it might have been God's intervention. On July 4th, Vicksburg fell and Gettysburg was won, and the freedom of the United States was assured. Before that, it was not. So 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, and as I said, we're engaged in a great fight for freedom. To determine whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of the field as a final resting place for those who died, that that nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow these grounds. Those who fought here, living and dead, have consecrated it far beyond our poor ability to add or detract. It is rather for us the living to here take increased devotion from those who gave their last full measure of devotion, and that we, the living, highly resolve that these honored dead shall not have died in vain, but that this country, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and so the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Thank you. I just want to note that we have something new on my website, dickmorris.com. How many of you get my emails from the website? Good, about a quarter of you. Good. So the rest of you, and those that get them, every morning I do a video that's 5 minutes of my talking about some topic, just like I did today. And they get posted on the website and in your email boxes if you sign up at 11 o'clock every morning, Eastern Time. And you can get it, you can watch it. Go to my website, you can see all the ones you've missed. And it really is just like this. It's kind of conversational. We call it the Lunch Alert. And it's kind of fun. It's my bid for Dick Morris TV. So I'd love to take questions. Lisa and somebody else are going around there, okay? So this lady over here has a question. Okay.
I'm not a lady, but that's okay.
Okay.
We appreciate your time, and we're honored to have you here at the meeting this evening.
I appreciate your time, and I'm honored to be invited.
There are times when the terms that people use can hide an agenda in the commentary. I'd like to return to the Senate Bill 5 comments that you made, and we hear the term collective bargaining rights bandied about. I would like to ask your opinion on, is collective bargaining a right or is it a power?
I believe it's a right. I believe that it's the right to join unions, and there's a right to bargain collectively. We understood during the Industrial Revolution that an individual worker was not the equal of his boss, and that his ability to bargain for higher wages was limited. And we recognized the right of employees to voluntarily band together into unions to bargain collectively. Now I say voluntarily, it should be done by secret ballot. It should be voluntary, not coerced, no more card check or anything like that. But once they decide to be in a union and they want to bargain collectively, they should have the right to do that. However, it is a matter of private determination whether the bargaining that goes on in the private sector is permitted to go into things other than wages and benefits and compensation issues. That's a matter between the factory owner and the workers. And you have all the ability of economic warfare on each side. The one has the ability to move, the other has the ability to strike, all of those things, and great, go ahead, have at it, boys. But in the public sector, it's a very different situation, because ultimately, the real recipients of the service are not at the bargaining table. Al Shanker once said, founder of the teachers union, when children start to pay union dues, then I'll fight for higher quality education. Wow. And the point is that they're not represented. Hospital patients are not represented in the SEIU negotiations. A bunch of politicians are represented who, as Senator Faber said, are elected by the campaign contributions they get from those very same unions. So I believe that ultimately there is a capacity for some kind of check and balance over unions on financial issues. because ultimately the taxing power rests with elected representatives. But I do not believe there is any effective check on work rules and other conditions. So where I draw the line is that I do not want collective bargaining to tell us how to educate our children. It's none of your damn business.
Yes, Mr. Morris, your conservative credentials with me are beyond question. But I have to admit that during the Clinton years, I really hated you. I have a sort of a two-part question. Part one, were you really a closet conservative back then? And if the answer to that is no, then what caused this amazing transformation?
The short answer to your question, which is not going to be my final answer, is Winston Churchill's answer. If you're not a liberal when you're 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative when you're 40, you have no brains. And what he meant by that was that when you're 20, as when I was, you see only a straight line between where you are and where you want to get. You want to eliminate poverty, so give everybody money. You want to eliminate the threat of war, so disarm everybody. You want to improve the environment, so prohibit any pollution. Just the straight line effect. But then, when you learn about life and you learn about how the world works, you come to realize that that isn't the best way all the time. Most of the time, it's really not the best way. And I used to believe two things when I was young. One was that, parenthetically, that people believed in God as they got older because they wanted to hedge their bets. But then I came to realize people believe in God when they got older because nothing else worked. And I tried most of it. But I didn't inhale. But I also believed that people got more conservative as they got older because they got richer and they wanted to protect their money. And I increasingly learned that that's a factor, but the more important thing is that as they got older, they learned that the other ways didn't work, and the conservative way was the way that worked. And what taught me that lesson, and was fundamental in my shifting from liberal to conservative, was Ronald Reagan's dealing with the Soviet Union. I was 15 years old at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I remember feeling that the world might be blown up. I remember seriously considering the possibility that New York City, where I live, would be totally wiped out. And by the way, we came closer than we ever realized. There were those who said we should do a sneak attack on the bases in Cuba, and others said that would lead to a war with Russia, and the hawks in the cabinet said, you're full of it, there'll be no war with Russia. There were no Russian troops in Cuba. Well, it now turns out there were 50,000 Russian troops in Cuba, and that surprise strike would have killed thousands and thousands of Russians and triggered an automatic nuclear war. So that's how close we came. Bobby Kennedy was the one who switched that to the quarantine strategy. So I became crazy about eliminating the threat of nuclear war. And when Ronald Reagan got elected, I was horrified. I had voted for Carter, and I voted for Mondale, because I felt that he was not negotiating with the Russians, he was not freezing nuclear testing, he was promoting Star Wars that was accelerating the arms race, he was embarking on dangerous policies that could lead to nuclear war. And then what happened? The whole damn thing came crashing down. All of a sudden, there's no possibility of a nuclear war because the other side went home. And I woke up and I said, hey, I've been wrong. Just dead wrong all these years. If we had had arms control, if we hadn't had Star Wars, if we hadn't competed with them, they would have been able to survive economically for another 20 years, and then there would be a risk of nuclear war. And I began to re-examine everything that I was thinking. And at the time, I was very, very close to Bill Clinton in the 80s in Arkansas. And we would talk over all this stuff. And in particular, we would look at the failure of the Carter administration with its welfare policies. And we would look at what he regarded as the heartlessness of the Reagan administration about cutting benefits to people. Later turned out that wasn't so heartless because the economy did well and helped all those people more than the programs did. But we didn't know that. So we formulated a new idea between us, which was the new social contract, we called it. He then called it the new covenant. And I was so illiterate in the Bible, when I wrote those lines, I didn't realize that there was a new covenant in the Bible. That's what Christianity is all about. I just didn't know. Found out later. So the idea of the new covenant was that we would give people opportunity and they would take responsibility. We'll give you welfare benefits and job training and daycare, but you have to work and accept a time limit for welfare. We'll give you scholarships, but you have to work in an underserved communities if you're a new doctor or a new teacher. Opportunity for responsibility. And that concept of a contractual exchange, we really saw as the successor to Reaganism on the one hand and ultra-liberalism on the other hand. So those were the buy stations of my progress as the years unfolded. Then when I joined the Clinton administration, I really came to understand how disastrous the budget deficit was, how important it was to balance the budget and to return to a surplus or create a surplus. I understood how tax cuts were fundamental to that, because I saw that all of the cutting plans we mapped out, all those yellow pads and backs of envelopes didn't work, but cutting the capital gains tax did and gave us a budget surplus. And then the welfare reform bill. I pushed Clinton to sign it. I really negotiated that myself. And after he signed it, that program has cut child poverty by 1/3 and cut welfare by 1/2. It's just extraordinary what it's achieved. And then after I left the Clinton White House, I continued my conservative journey. I guess you could tell it in terms of presidential races. I voted for, I voted for Bush in '88 because I couldn't stand Dukakis. Obviously voted for Clinton in '96 and '92 and '96. Voted for Gore in 2000, barely. Bush in '04, and obviously McCain in '08. So it's a journey for me. It's been a progress. But it's a progress that's a thinking person's journey, based not on abandoning the idealism of my youth, but on understanding that the best way to get there is by conservative causes. I can think of nothing more significant in indicating that than the journey that's taken place on nuclear power. I was one of the leaders in the anti-nuclear power movement. God wished that I had not done that, and we would have nuclear power plants with clean energy throughout the United States that would leave us independent of foreign oil, like France is. So it's a series of changes like that. It's learning that the reason an African child dies of malaria every 30 seconds is that Rachel Carson convinced us that DDT was wrong. And as a result, we stopped using it, and as a result, mosquitoes came back. You know, the Joan Collins folk song, "Give me spots on the apples, but leave the birds and the bees." Well, the problem was that you also left the mosquitoes, and malaria that was on the verge of extinction came back and now is a potent killer in Africa because of liberal policies that backfired. Well, a book I'm at some point considering writing is all of those stories of liberal policies that resulted in undoing of liberal agendas. A longer answer than you bargained on.
Okay, Dick, 2012 election, the most defining probably in all our lives. What I think everybody in this room is talking about and trying to make up their minds.
Sure.
The candidates for the Republican presidency and non-candidates. In your experience, what you're hearing, who do the Democrats fear the most? Who's the strongest candidate?
Okay, I'd be happy to answer that. That will have to be my last question because I have to go and have dinner with one of them, Herman Cain. Let's start with Obama. To understand why we are going to defeat him in 2012. How almost impossible it was for him to get elected in 2008. He did three things that are beyond belief extraordinary and have never happened before in American politics, or anything close to them ever happened before. The last time a candidate was able to significantly increase voter turnout in an ethnic group was John F. Kennedy among the Catholic vote in 1960. And before that, it has never happened in American history. And yet Obama increased black turnout from 11% of the vote to 14% of the vote. African Americans are 12% of the population. In 2004, they were 11% of the vote. In 2008, they were 14%. And he carried that extra 3 points, 98-2. So that gave him 3 points better than John Kerry had run. Now, will that happen again? It'll happen to some extent. Maybe 12.5%, but not 14. And not 98-2, maybe 90-10, like it's historically been. Because I just don't think that the novelty is there, and I think the unemployment is deeper. Then he increased Latino turnout from 7% to 8.5%. And whereas John Kerry carried the Latino vote by 10 points, he carried the Latino vote by 48 points. So that gave him essentially another 1.5 points in the electorate. Now his job rating among Latinos is only about 6 points better than his job rating nationwide. And there's no basis for believing that there's any enthusiasm there. And most likely he'll go back to winning it by 10 or 15 or 20 points on a regular sized turnout. And then the most incredible thing of all is he doubled the turnout of 18 to 25-year-olds. Doubled it. Well, that's not going to happen again. Most of them are unemployed now. They're facing a bleak economic future, and there's no enthusiasm for him on the campuses like there used to be. So when you look at the difficulty it took him to change all those results, you can see how almost impossible it is to replicate. And yet the other side is true, which is that middle-aged and older white voters are going to be pouring out in numbers that they were not in 2008, because we now fully understand the stakes, and we fully understand what the need to oust Obama really is. So I do not believe that Obama will win. I believe that the economy is going to get worse. I believe that his policies are causing the depression that we're in. They're going to cause another dip. They're going to cause stagflation, where just like last time we have unemployment, but now we have inflation as well, and it's going to be a total disaster over the next year and a half. And it'll be a joke to consider that this guy could get reelected. Now, as to the Republican candidates, let me say that I think it's an excellent field, and I think that there are 3 or 4 of them that could defeat Obama. Now, and let me also say that I made a decision about 2 months ago not to criticize any Republican candidate for president. I took the 11th commandment vow. Because frankly, I might have to schlep one of them through the whole general election campaign. And I don't want to make my task harder now by opening my mouth. This is an election I plan to be very involved in, and I'm not going to burn those bridges now. You have to look at the Republican nominating process like Wimbledon or Forest Hills, the US Open. It's quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals. The final is the Republican against Obama. The semifinal is the grassroots candidate against the establishment candidate, the conservative candidate against the moderate candidate, the Tea Party candidate against the regular Republican candidate. And the quarterfinals are within each segment of the electorate to choose who goes into the semifinals. Now on the center court, the Club for Growth court, the Chamber of Commerce, the Fortune 500, the National Association of Manufacturers, on that court is Romney against Pawlenty and Huntsman. And that's a bye. That's almost like a first-round bye for Romney, because Pawlenty isn't going anywhere and neither is Huntsman. And if Perry gets into the race, he could be a factor, but we'll see. I don't think anybody who thinks about getting in doesn't. It's like thinking about sex. You don't do it then. By the way, I got to interrupt for a great story. This is a true story. Winston Churchill was thrown out as Prime Minister of Britain in 1945 after he won the war. And Clement Attlee, a socialist, was elected. And he nationalized everything in Britain, the banks, the railroads, the steel companies. And a year after he took office, Churchill was the leader of the opposition. And he was in the men's room at the House of Commons. And Attlee walked in, and Churchill was at a urinal. And he scooched down 3 urinals and brought his jacket over like that. And Attlee said, "Shy, Winston?" And he said, "No, it is not at all. It is just that whenever you see anything that is big and impressive, you nationalize it." Okay, and on the conservative, God can't be too careful. The grassroots side of the court, you have basically Kane against Bachmann, with Ron Paul sort of hovering over it like a rain cloud. I do not like Ron Paul. And you have, and maybe Santorum gets into it, probably doesn't really make it. The reason I don't like Ron Paul is I do not believe in legalizing drugs. I've had too many relatives die to believe in that. And I do believe in fighting the war on terror aggressively. We don't have to have half the army in Afghanistan to do that. We can do it with a smaller force, with drone missiles. And if the Afghan government's taken over by the Taliban and asked us to leave, we say, make us. So I just don't buy this isolationist garbage. And I don't know who's going to win that, Kane or Bachmann. They're both excellent people. They're both terrific. And I think it's really good that they're fighting each other, because it's really important to have them both vetted and to learn the negatives about them now that we don't have to learn them. So we don't have a John Edwards or an Arnold Schwarzenegger, come up and bite us. And it's important that we go through that process, and I'm glad we're going to do it. But let me say this, I deeply believe that either Michelle Bachmann or Mitt Romney or Herman Cain can defeat Barack Obama and will be a vast, vast improvement.
I know a lot of you guys are going to have some fun tonight. So it's time for fireworks. So I want to give you a couple tips on that. The best way to see the fireworks, which are going to start at about 10 o'clock, so we've got plenty of time, it's about 10 minutes till 9, is if you head towards Nationwide Arena, which is just, if you go to the front of the Hyatt here and head towards, you can see Nationwide Arena, it's kind of the curved top building. If you head in that direction, you should see the fireworks pretty clearly, because it kind of comes up from behind there. Okay? If you have a hotel room that's on a higher floor, you might be able to see in that direction. Some of the parking decks. The best part about this whole thing is there should be about 400,000 people outside, and we have all their parking spaces. So you can go maybe on the parking decks and see where you can go. Just be safe, have a great time. Let's get up tomorrow, let's have another great day.